So Warchigan has had some good and bad updates over the years. However, today I really want to take a look at one which was probably one of the more controversial ones of all time, and why I believe it is the worst update that Warchigan has ever added, and why I believe it still hasn't aged well until this day. It's already been past a year since this update was added, and I think it's still creating certain issues for the game, which today I'd like to really talk about, because it isn't something that a lot of people bring up, which I'm a little surprised about, to be honest. So anyway, let's just jump right into it. Today we're gonna be talking about the War Lab. I believe the idea of itself kinda just feels lazy in a way, because there really is no meaningful upgrades which you get out of really any vehicles right here. There's three types of upgrades that you get: speed, health, and firepower. What a lot of people really wanted to see instead from a War Lab or rubber vehicle upgrades is actual upgrades and changes to the loadout, because something like this would actually freshen up the experience and give the vehicles a little bit more spice. What this feature essentially has done is just power creep the game more. The power creep is not as much of an issue as what it was before, however it is still something I would like to talk about. So let's just take a look at an example of one of the tanks. Let's just say the Leopard 2 ARC. This thing, when you max it out, has 2730 health and a boosted firepower by 30%. So essentially, whenever you're going up against somebody which doesn't have this, they're going to be losing 100% of the time if no strategy is involved. And in most fights in Warchicken, no strategy will be involved, and people will just rush each other and just start shooting at each other. This is how most fights will go in this game. And you see, the problem with this is that if there's a vehicle that's always going to be 30% stronger than you by both health whenever you're trying to tank their damage, but also firepower by 30%, that creates an even bigger gap than the one that they actually promote when it comes to just number showcase. And this really brings me to my next point, and that's that this feature as a whole really forces you to stick with one vehicle until you have others upgraded. So let's say if you are starting up on a game and you really need to pick a vehicle which is going to be able to do the job for you, or else you're going to keep dying. Let's just say you upgrade the KF-51 Panther, right? Well, for a few days, that is going to be the only vehicle that you'll ever be using. And I think this really does create a variety problem within the game too. We've already had one where some vehicles are just stronger than the other, which the developers are actively fixing. However, it is not going to be a meaningful fix, even if they do good balance changes, because the vehicles themselves will only be used because they're upgraded. So it essentially forces everyone to be using one certain vehicle for a very long time, which I think is just really boring as a whole, because whenever you're fighting anybody or just raiding them in general, they're just going to be using the same vehicle over and over again, because their counters to you will not work because they're not upgraded. Now the next problem which I want to talk about is that this feature essentially draws the gap between the really weak and the really powerful vehicles even bigger. Let's take an example of the F-22 Raptor, which already has a really strong foundation of stats in general. But if we move into other planes at the bottom of the list of here, so as an example, let's take something like a MiG-29 Fulcrum or even the F-14 Tomcat, all these really early vehicles. You need to max them out in order to be able to achieve the stats of a F-22, which isn't really maxed out. So the F-22 itself will always be having this superiority, or the superiority itself becomes even bigger. I think you guys kind of understand what I mean here. This means that they need to buff all the earlier vehicles even more in order to actually make the playing ground even more even. Which really moves me to the next point. This feature as a whole just makes the game balancing a lot more difficult to perform, because whenever they're adding new vehicles, they need to account for two different things, not just one. You're for one accounting its power on stock level, but also its max level, which can make a very meaningful difference, because there's been times where they added vehicles like, for example, the Seahawk, and they probably didn't think it was going to be that strong because by base level its stats weren't that great. However, when you maxed it out, that thing was an absolute powerhouse, and it was literally destroying everybody in the game. And now moving into the last point, and that's going to be that this system as a whole creates a completely endless grind in this game. And I know it's already been a year, and I know a lot of you guys that still play this game after a year actively, you still don't have your vehicles maxed out. Well, that is actually because in order to max out every single vehicle in this game, you need to spend a lot of time. And I'm gonna be fully calculating how much time you need to do. So for example, every single upgrade in this game is gonna be taking a different amount of time. Level 1s are gonna be taking you 30 minutes, level 2s are gonna be taking you 1 hour, and level 3s are gonna be taking 1 hour and 30 minutes. So this adds up to 3 hours for each category of the vehicle to be maxed out overall, which is overall going to be 9 hours. Plus, on top of this, there's around 150 vehicles in the game, somewhere around those lines. So this means in order to max out everything in War Tycoon with maximum time efficiency, you need to spend roughly around 1,350 hours. That is so long, and realistically I don't see many people reaching above 1,000 hours in a Roblox video game. That is just not something that's gonna be happening. However, the good news are you don't really need all the vehicles to be maxed out. This is really just an option, but the fact that this option takes you so much time is crazy. I don't think any other game has had it this big. However, I don't really want to make this video only negative. There are some positives to this update which I really want to go over, and that's going to be the fact that the planes, the tanks, the ground vehicles, really all vehicles in general have benefited from one certain upgrade to a very high extent, and that's going to be the speed buff. I believe the speed in this game before the upgrades themselves was incredibly slow. Getting around the map was just really unfun because of the map's increased size compared to before. I think the speed itself being buffed is a really good thing because it just makes the gameplay flow a lot faster, and vehicles can actually get from base to base a lot quicker too. But then again, at the same time, what they also could have done if they wanted to make the gameplay flow a little bit faster and just allow people to get from base to base quicker would have just been to buff all the vehicle speeds by 30% without actually adding the system. But I do understand that this is kind of what the system is also for. And the one last advantage which I also see of this being added is due to the fact that the grind in the game is quite big. It also increases the average playtime of the game, which is a good sign for Roblox to start promoting the game, which means we're gonna have more new players and just more people in the community. And who doesn't want a bigger game? I think it benefits all of us because the bigger game, the bigger budget, the better updates we get, vice versa. But anyway, for the time being, that's all I have for you guys in today's video. Do let me know what you think about this very controversial update after quite a while. I don't think it has aged well. I think it still creates issues for the game until this day, but I really want to hear what you guys think. I'll see you all later.